Pope Francis celebrating his first Easter at the Vatican this morning. One of the cardinals who chose him, Timothy Dolan of New York, is celebrating at St. Patrick's this morning. But he sat down with me earlier this week to discuss the new Pope and what he means for the Church, especially here in America. Most striking to both of us, the focus of Francis on simplicity and service.
Easter is always a time for renewed hope, a sense of promise and confidence. But this year is special because of Pope Francis. As we watch him, and it's clear to me that the world is watching, you got it. He brings us back to the simplicity, the sincerity, just the raw, basic goodness of the gospel. Look what he did on Thursday. You know, he washed the feet of who? 12 inmates, 12 young juvenile delinquents, imitating Jesus at the Last Supper and washing the feet of his disciples. And he's constantly reminding us that religion is not only about faith, what we believe, you bet it is, but it's also about how we live, especially in service to the ones Jesus called.
So this symbolism, this not wearing the fur-lined cape, not wearing the gold cross, living in the more simple apartments, you believe that really matters?
I do, and from what I'm hearing, that's not part of the substance of the papacy, we know that, but it does. You know, these signs, these symbols have meaning. They wouldn't matter much to me, but from what I hear folks saying, they matter a lot to people. And they're saying, well, we have a pope who seems to crave simplicity and being with people, and the poor, the better. And as one person said to me, he reminds us a lot of Jesus. And I said, well, I hope so, because that's his job description. So apparently those things mean a lot to people.
You say he reminds us of Jesus. That is the job description of a pope. But I want to ask you about, we all saw that remarkable picture as well of him with Pope Emeritus Benedict. And on the one hand, so warm. On the other, I have to confess, and I'm an outsider to the Catholic faith, but it seemed a little unsettling.
Yeah,
to see two popes in the same.
I think it was unsettling to a lot of us because we're just not used to having two popes, even though one of them is retired. But I don't think it was unsettling to him. They almost tried to outclass each other in showing deference to one another, and that's not bad.
Take us inside the conclave as much as you can. I know you
Sure.
can't speak much about it, but describe the challenge you and your fellow cardinals felt you were meeting.
Well, you know what it was, George? What was very important is the time before the conclave. The conclave was relatively brief. It was only 28 hours, right? The time before, that's when I was actually more nervous, believe it or not, because I felt the burden of getting to know my brother cardinals better. Once I entered the conclave, George, and the veterans, the cardinals who had been at a conclave before said, Tim, relax, because you get to know them, and by the time you enter the conclave, you will have settled on 2 or 3 people that you think with whom you would be at peace, being the next successor of St. Peter. And that was true.
You know what I want to ask you?
You want to ask who the 3 were?
Yes.
Go ahead and ask, but I'm not going to answer.
But you were at peace with your decision when you walked into the conclave.
I was at peace with the people I had in mind, and I was extraordinarily at peace with the final decision.
And now that Pope Francis is in place, what is the challenge facing him, the biggest challenge facing him as leader of more than 1 billion Catholics?
You know what I think it is? And actually, I spoke about this in the congregations before the conclave. I think the biggest challenge facing him, George, is to reconnect Jesus and his church. There's now a growing cleavage between Jesus and his church. You've reported some of the statistics. People will say, I don't have any problem with Jesus. I got some problems with the church. And probably, I think his greatest pastoral challenge is going to be to reconnect Jesus and his church.
Special challenge here in the United States. We recently did a poll of American Catholics. 60% believe the Catholic Church is out of touch with their concerns. Mm-hmm. How do you address those?
So I think when I hear people, though, it depends on what concerns they're talking about. Sometimes, by nature, the church has got to be out of touch with concerns because we're always supposed to be thinking of the beyond, the eternal, the changeless, okay? Our major challenge is to continue in a credible way to present the eternal concerns to people in a timeless, attractive way. And sometimes there is a disconnect between what they're going through and what Jesus and his church is teaching, and that's a challenge for us.
And especially this week, because it's been at the top of the news for many gay and lesbian Americans, gay and lesbian Catholics, they feel unwelcome.
They do.
In the church. What do you say as a minister, as a pastor, to a gay couple that comes to you and say, we love God, we love the church, but we also love each other and we want to raise a family in faith?
Sure.
What do you say to them?
Well, the first thing I say to them is, I love you too, and God loves you, and you were made in God's image and likeness, and we want your happiness. and you're entitled to friendship. But we also know that God has told us that the way to happiness, that especially when it comes to sexual love, that is intended only for a man and woman in marriage, where children can come about naturally. We got to do better to see that our defense of marriage is not reduced to an attack on gay people. And I admit we haven't been too good at that. We try our darndest to make sure we're not an anti-anybody. We're in the defense of what God has taught us about marriage, that it's one man, one woman forever to bring about new life. We got to do better to try to take that away from being anti-anybody. And I admit we haven't been too good.
Yeah, how do you do that?
Well, I don't know. We're trying. We're trying our best to do it. We got to listen to people like the couple that you just described that say we don't feel comfortable here. Jesus died on the cross for them as much as he did for me. But you got a point. Sometimes we're not as successful or as effective as we can be in translating that warm embrace into also teaching what God has told us about the way he wants us to live.
And that challenge you face in so many different ways, because as you just mentioned, not only do you have the rise of people who are spiritual but not religious, but also here in the United States, the fastest growing group are those with no religion at all.
Yeah.
How do you open your door so people feel that they can have a pathway back to God?
That too is a challenge. Now, what I'm afraid is that that's afflicting society in general. That's afflicting families. That's afflicting communities. People want privacy. People crave isolation. We're hearing parents say that they can't even get their kids to talk anymore. They're tweeting one another. So this craving of individualism, being alone, being aloofness, that's afflicting all of culture, all of society. We're feeling it in the church too, because we're not about me, we're about us. We're about the our. We say our Father, but society is saying it's me, myself, and I. And we're saying, it's us, it's we. And that's a tough sell in society.
You have become one of the most prominent voices in American Catholicism right now.
Thanks.
And no surprise to you mentioned often as a possible pope going in to the conclave. But the question I have about that is, did you find over the course of those discussions that this whole idea that having an American pope is simply out of the question because America is this great superpower? Is that receding?
I think it is, George. Now, beforehand, I said I thought that was still there, and actually I thought there was some wisdom to that.
And you thought you had no chance.
Which I still believe, and obviously that was correct. But I told you so. But I did believe that probably the wisdom that would say you shouldn't have the leader of the world's greatest spiritual power from a country that's the world's greatest earthly power. I said, that's a wise thing. I don't think my brother cardinals believe that anymore. We're just looking for a good pastor, a good communicator.
So maybe
a holy,
one day,
happy man. Maybe one day there would be a pope from the United States. So. Mm-hmm.
Nelson Mandela also on our minds this week, back in the hospital right now. And there is a man who exemplified for millions around the globe, and especially in South Africa, the power of forgiveness.
You bet he did. I'm praying with and for him. I had the honor of meeting him once. And what the word that comes to mind when you speak of a giant like Nelson Mandela is reconciliation. And that's a good thing to remember about Easter. We say that Jesus came to reconcile the world. He wanted to embrace the world and bring them to his Father. And the world took those hands and put them on a cross because they don't like being reconciled. Nelson Mandela was one of those who could take his hands and embrace a nation. The world is in his debt because he taught us the power